like out of nowhere, and she wrote. She's like, you know what this is? And I'm like, no. And she goes, well, I'm gonna put it all on, and then when somebody asks me, what are you for Halloween? I'm gonna say I'm a waste of money. That's all the shit I bought, and I wore it once.
Or there's this funny line, I don't remember who I was talking to, but they were like, yeah, I go out for Halloween, I just dress as myself. And then when people come up to me, they're like, well, what are you supposed to be? I turn to them and I say, well, I was supposed to be a lot of things.
That's pretty good.
That's really good. Should I move this? Is this good?
I think that's a pretty good distance. I
Okay.
mean, maybe a little closer. Let's see. I would say.
Let's see.
Actually, could you also scoot your chair in a little bit?
This way?
Yeah, just like a little closer.
How's that?
I think that's good. Yeah.
Okay.
And then this can be. That's probably going to be a comfortable distance.
Thank you.
All right. Oh yeah.
I'm not.
this is so
I
fun.
didn't prepare anything. Are we just going to
That's
dive
great.
into conversation?
Yep.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right. We are rolling. Here we go. Mattermore. Take one. Rolling.
Okay, Amy, how do we create world peace? We're starting really light.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Okay. How much time do we have?
We have as much time as we need. All right, I want us to dive in,
Yeah.
just hitting the ground right away. And I'd love to do that by reading part of the foreword from your book, Living on Purpose, and then ask you a question about it if you're cool with that.
Totally. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do it.
All right, so this is a direct quote, literally the first few sentences in the book. Can you imagine a world where each of us awake each day with a feeling of deep engagement in our lives? A world where self-compassion, honesty, and connection were the norm? Can you imagine yourself waking up every day with an inner feeling of true joy and happy anticipation, the kind of feeling you had as a child on a special day of celebration? Do you remember having days when you couldn't wait to get out of bed to see what magic was about to happen? That kind of excitement comes from knowing and honoring what's true for you at your very core. So my first reaction while reading that was a smile, because that's beautiful. And to open a book that way also brings sort of a claim and a question along with it, which is, like, I want that for every person, personally. And something I've heard from folks for years, whenever there's this conversation around purpose or joy, is, well, that's just not realistic for how the world works. For one, I have bills to pay and mouths to feed. Work is work. It's supposed to be hard. Authenticity and joy and purpose are a luxury. And then for two, when I scroll through social media, talk to my friends, or turn on the news, it's clear that the world is in crisis. So how can I even want for myself to chase joy or purpose in my work? So my first question to you is it realistic to want purpose and joy?
I think it's inevitable. I don't think it's realistic. I think it's natural and inherent. I think it's a birthright to want that. I think what gets in the way is, I'll just get right to the heart of it. It's false perception. It's fear. And it's patterned habits that we don't even know that are things that we've chosen that we're at will to change.
So false perceptions, fear, and patterns that we often don't even know that we've chosen.
Bingo.
Could you say more about those three?
Yeah. So I'm a firm believer that at the root of all the turmoil that we're experiencing is fear. It's just fear. And coupled with lack of awareness, ignorance, right? Not ignorance, book smart ignorance, but just a lack of awareness of truth. Truth, like who I am, who we are, what's possible for each of us humans. And at the end of the day, I think that everything we experience in our life is a reflection of the relationship we have with ourselves. And if we genuinely want to thrive, we have to, that's really what the work is about. And so healing the world peace doesn't start by going and solving all of that out there. It's first an inner game.
Sure. I mean, I'm with you. And I think of so many of the conversations that I have with folks. And so I'm almost imagining them in the stands behind me. And so, like, let's say you're you're in a coffee shop with someone and they see you holding your book
Mm-hmm.
and they're behind you and they're just overwhelmed and they're like, well, I mean, how would me doing my inner work or like me caring about my purpose, like how does that help anything else in the world? Why should that really matter?
Well, I don't know if I would go right to purpose. I would say, maybe purpose is a big term, right? And I think
And carries a lot of ideas around it.
exactly what and so purpose, in the way that I think about purpose, and particularly how I wrote about it in the book, it's not so much of a noun; it's a way of being. I think of it more of being on purpose instead of purpose as this thing that I'm supposed to fulfill in order to be happy in the world, right?
Yeah.
And really, I would probably ask that person, it's not so much of a matter of purpose as it is maybe a peace of mind.
Yeah. Well, the way I think about our crises and really the call of our modern times is I don't see it as necessarily just about fear. I think it's about doubt. That there's nothing inherently wrong with fear. The challenge, though, is with change or growth or transformation comes loss and an increase of uncertainty. And in this world where change seems to be happening not just fast, but faster and faster and faster, where we're surrounded by so much data and information, and news has no boundaries, and so we seem to have access to everything happening at all times, and the negative stuff is what gets the most traction and engagement, and so it's just everywhere. It can feel scary to think about anything that increases our sense of uncertainty. And we're in this time where, for the last few decades, our sense of trust in institutions has been plummeting. And so, like, when you think about grief, it's really hard to move through grief without hope. Because if you don't have a light at the end of the tunnel, it's really hard to keep walking through a tunnel. And so you can't have hope without trust. Like, hope breaks down into goals, pathways, and agency. Do you have something that you know that you want? Do you know some ways of getting what you want? And do you believe in your capability to be able to get there? Do you have a sense of agency? And so many of those have been broken down. So many people go through in this society without getting any skills for relating with their inner world. And so I've worked with so many people where you ask them, well, like, what do you really want? Like, what matters most to you? And a lot of people are like, well, honestly, I feel like I've played the game.
Yeah.
Like, I've built the big, bright, shiny life, and it just feels sort of hollow.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure what I want. So then
That's
it's
right.
like, okay, well, it's hard to have real goals that you really care about if you've been so optimized for just doing things that you think other people want you to do.
Well said. Bingo.
And it's hard to have pathways if you haven't actually spent any time pursuing stuff that you know you really want, and then you see the different ways to get there. So then it's hard to believe that that's possible. And it's hard to have a sense of agency if you haven't actually built confidence doing things that matter to you.
I mean, it's like you read my book.
I did just this morning.
Yeah, bravo. I mean, yes, absolutely. I mean, it's gosh, there's so much to say to build on what you've just offered here. And I think, the heart of what I'm hearing here is we've all been conditioned to follow this formula. We learn it young.
Yep.
And and the way I see it, it's really based on our neurobiology that's built for acceptance, belonging, and approval.
Totally.
And, when we're young, naturally, we do what we're told, and we seek that praise, and we seek, oh, did I do it right? And did I get the accolades? And can I be accepted as a result of having done it well, or as I should have done it? And, and so what happens young is we get conditioned away from this inner guidance of what feels right. And instead we start doing what sounds right. And as a result of that, we place that guidance onto this path outside of ourselves and say, okay, well, if I follow that, that is going to lead me to a sense of feeling good,
Yeah.
a fulfillment, a good life. And so we put our purpose into following this formula outside of ourselves. And then we go forth, and as you said, as the people you've talked to, is I've done it, I've achieved the shiny thing, but I feel empty. And it's because they've, for many of us, we've done what we were told, and we were never asked the right question. What do you want to feel?
Yeah.
We've been asked, what do you want to do? What do you want to achieve? And it's not that there's anything wrong or bad about that, but one of the biggest breakthroughs I had, it was in 2008 after my first child was born. I had a big breakdown, identity paralysis, really, and it was that moment where I realized, wow, I can't go back to my job in tech because I've got this child I love so much, and I'm not about to leave this child for that. But wait, that was my life, right? And so I had this huge breakdown, but in the breakdown came this incredible breakthrough. And what I was truly like hit with as a huge realization was, Amy, you're going about this thing called life all wrong. It's not about figuring it out, it's about feeling it out. Because everything you want, everything you think you want it because you think it's going to make you feel a certain way. So for us humans, yes, we want stuff, we want things, we want achievements, we have goals. But when you look at the long game, those things are an intermediary to what we really want, which is a feeling state, fulfillment, meaning, joy, connection, love, purpose. But we've lost that ultimate map, and we stop at the thing.
Yeah.
And then we chase the thing with this idea, okay, well, it must be the next thing. It must be the next thing. It must be the next thing.
Well, and the danger with that, well, before I even say the danger to it, to see the truth within that, you really only have to spend some time reflecting either for yourself or talk to a few other people and ask them about like the things they want and then ask them why.
Yeah, exactly.
And you ask why enough times
Yep.
and it always ends up into a feeling.
Bingo.
Like, well, I want to make more money because then it will give me more security. Okay, so you want to feel more secure. And I want to have less worry about myself and my family. I want less worry. I want to feel more secure. I want to feel more hopeful. It's like, okay, great. Or I want this promotion because I'm not really feeling a sense of aliveness or like real contribution or a sense of challenge. I don't feel like I'm growing. And so it's like ultimately these experiences really that we want. And the danger with not asking yourself that why or really looking for yourself to see what are the feelings you're trying to get more of is that you then don't give yourself the opportunity to evaluate the stories that you're telling yourself around what you have to do to get that experience.
Yes, well said. Really well said. Really well said.
And then within all those stories, there's a lot of voices that aren't yours. And so we can get on this sort of autopilot where you keep sort of playing the game that, like you've said, we learn so young and it gets shaped. We all sort of can understand what this game board is of what we should do.
Yeah.
And then the problem is that map doesn't lead you to your ultimate, truest, most fulfilling life.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's why, in my book, I was like, this is the roadmap to the life you were born to live. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about that roadmap. Particularly, I'm thinking about folks in their 30s and 40s that might be at a place where they sort of have that realization, right? Where they've played a certain game board, or maybe they've reached a certain transition point. Maybe they're at a breakdown,
Yeah.
but they haven't had a eureka breakthrough moment that is like a realization of what the core of their life now should be.
Right.
That they realize that they want a new core, but they're not exactly sure how to find it or what it should look like. What do they do?
Well, kind of following along what we're talking about, the first step really is to wake up to this idea that maybe it's not a thing that you really want. Maybe it is a feeling. And so to let that truth organically integrate, right? Because don't take that on my word. That's something someone has to really see for themselves. Yeah, actually, you're right. Everything I do want is for a feeling. So now the next logical question is, well, then what do you want to feel? And then once we get clear on that, right, it's likely going to be something that's not current, right? Because otherwise, why would they feel the way they do?
Sure.
But to get really clear, and it's like, okay, so then take a look at the things you've wanted. Is that a direct map to the feeling state you want. Because I'm reminded of, in a lot of the coaching conversations I've had in the past, I'll have someone in senior leadership that's gunning for executive leadership.
Sure.
And they are just hell-bent on it and doing everything they can and working their patootie off and trying to prove and trying to validate. And, but when they really stop and say, well, what is it you actually want? They're like, I want some spaciousness. I want to feel present with my kids. I want to feel, I want to feel peace. I want to feel significant. I want to feel love. I'm like, okay, that's all great. Now, like, let's look at this path you're on. And it's not that it's right or wrong, good or bad. But then they start to look at it. It's like, wait, well, if I do this now, I'm going to start reporting to that person, which is going to make my life miserable, and I'm going to explode my number of direct reports, which is going to completely whack me out. It's like, and that's just a reality. Does that map? It may or may not. I don't know. But we have to start looking at these things, right? So the first thing is just take a look at what you want to feel. And by the way, I'm not at all up for trying to talk people out of what they want.
Sure.
Right? It's just we gotta make this well-rounded. We gotta
Sure.
look at the whole. We gotta look at it from a systems view, right? And so
Can you zoom out and just look at the truth
Right.
of it and be really honest with yourself about what you want and where you're heading and how all that adds up?
yeah, and let's just take stock, right?
Yep.
So then it's like, okay, and if you get on board with this idea that maybe feeling is relevant as a very important variable in this equation, well, then how might we attend to that? So then of course, if it's feeling, we have to start honoring our feeling states, because this is a big aha for folks. If we've been trained to figure it out, right? And so in the way I see it in my framework, it's figuring it out is really akin to chasing the thing, not with no awareness that it maps to the ultimate feeling state.
Sure.
So there's nothing wrong with figuring it out, but it often lacks the full picture.
Sure.
And so that's why if we spend our life figuring things out, we'll end up with great lives on paper, but then feeling quite empty and miserable within midlife crisis, right?
Sure. Well, because the way I think about the figuring it out is like a dashboard and you're on a rocket ship.
Mm-hmm.
You can get really good at your intellectual capacities, problem solving, critically evaluating, planning, and that's like the dashboard of a rocket ship.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, if you don't know where you're going, it's not going to matter how amazing you are at maneuvering that rocket ship or how powerful your jet blasters are. You're not going to end up in the right place if you don't know where the right place is that you want to be heading.
Yeah.
And ultimately, that's not an intellectual practice. Like you can use your intellectual tools, but you have to root deeper into a feeling state to figure out how you want to feel, where you want to go.
Mm-hmm.
And importantly, like you highlight, what are your feelings telling you about what you want?
Yes. And that was a great metaphor there to describe it. And, so then when someone starts to get clear that, actually, what I want to feel is I want to feel meaning, or I want to feel more gratitude in my life. I want to feel at peace. You name it. Then the question is, all right, well, now we have to start navigating differently. Because while figuring it out is really about following the path that makes sense, that sounds right, that's strategic, that seems logical. And notice how we talk to ourselves. Like, oh, that seems like a good plan, right? And then I'm just going to slow it down for a moment. I know for me, and this is usually the case for a lot of people, if I'm using that language, this seems right, this seems logical, this makes sense, the energy's up here. And there's a lot of frenetic energy in my head, and it can be exciting and it can feel really good, but it's quite busy up here, right? I'm strategizing, I'm analyzing, I'm assessing, I am calculating. And there's a time and a place for that. But when it comes to my deepest desires, right, it's not really about a strategy, it's about this feeling. And so then there's the way of navigating where I might say, oh, that feels right. Oh, I can feel that in my gut. Like, that feels relieving. That feels expansive. And so something I lean on is, some universal principles. And I've come to understand that the universe is growing by virtue of expansion and contraction. Expansion and contraction. Our entire existence is predicated on duality. Light and dark, death and birth, up and down, you name it.
Yep.
And so there is expansion and contraction. And that is a creative force. We can't get away from the contraction, and we're going to have both. And when it comes to navigating in the direction of growth and fulfillment and purpose, in my world, I've gotten good at really feeling for what feels expansive versus what feels constrictive. And for me, if I'm figuring it out, often it's constrictive. And it's not that that's wrong or bad. There's a lot of data that comes if I choose the path of figuring it out. But what
Sure.
happens, without fail, it's always the path of most resistance with the least return. But if I'm listening for, okay, well, what option does this feel expansive? Is the energy lower in my body? Can I feel it in my gut? Can I feel it in my chest? Is there is there something here? Then you know what, let's see what happens. Now this tends for me, and for those that have done this with me, this tends to be the path of most abundance, least resistance, most allowance, least and most abundance. Funny thing is, though, it's usually the not the sexy choice, right? And so the ego, you have to bump up against the ego. And so, the ego that's been trained, get those accolades, go prove yourself, do what you're supposed to be doing.
This is what everyone else wants you to do.
Right. This is what you should be doing, right?
Right.
And so on this path of fulfillment and meaning and joy and purpose, it's really about, first, one, it's everything we kind of want is for a feeling. Two, acknowledging there's some value in really reorienting how you might navigate and feeling out versus figuring it out. And by no means am I saying like everything should be about feeling it out, but some of these bigger questions, when it comes to our what we're here to do on earth and how we want to be living our lives and what's most important to us, really using this way of navigating what feels expansive versus what sounds like a good idea can lead to a lot of returns. And it's surprising and then it starts to feel a little magical, right? Because you get synchronicity and then
Sure.
like the right timing and flow and all
Well,
this
and I want to
delightful
highlight
stuff.
some of the language that you're using because importantly, you're not saying easy or completely pleasant and positive.
Oh, goodness,
That
yes.
ultimately,
Yes, right.
when you sort of slow things down and zoom out and really try and check in with yourself and feel it out as opposed to figure it out, what you discover is true might be decisions or a path that has great difficulty through it.
Oh,
However,
yes.
there's a difference when you settle into something that you know is right. And we've all sort of had that experience of something that you know is right to do.
Yes.
And even if there's challenge that's ahead of you, that there's a little bit more peace that comes with it because it's like,
purposeful
oh,
pain.
right.
And it's like the difference between unwanted pain and purposeful pain, and discomfort, right?
It's that line, I think Viktor Frankl, that he who has a why can withstand almost any what.
Yes. Yeah, and anyhow, right? That's right.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I talk a lot about resistance in my work. And, resistance is one of these things we need in this plane of existence, right? Like, if we didn't have resistance, we wouldn't be able to walk. Like the friction that exists between my shoe and this floor.
If there's no wall, there's no need to climb.
Right? And if I didn't lift weights, I would have no strength. And so there's a time and a place for resistance and how we need to live and exist in this world.
Sure.
And there's a lot of unnecessary resistance that keeps us in negative states and eats up our bandwidth and eats up our creativity and keeps us from thriving. And for me, that's really the opportunity, is to unearth all of those ways in which we sustain unnecessary resistance so that we can create more flow in our life. And, and when we choose that path that might feel more expansive, for sure there's going to be resistance in it. But it's going to be the resistance like the resistance I feel between my shoe and the floor. It's going to be purposeful versus unwanted, which is just, and you know what I'm talking, like the unwanted resistance. It's I'm in traffic, I'm angry, I'm mad because I'm in traffic. It's just unnecessary resistance. Just you're in traffic, right?
Well, and there's a letting go that's really required in order to fall into the feeling it out. And part of that is letting go of this sense of certainty and control.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually it's part of what I'll like lean into with people to sort of expand the sense of like trust and hopefulness in it. That at first it can feel like less hopeful Because at first, when you really sort of look at it, the story that says, I should do that thing that intellectually I've figured out that I should do, even though it doesn't really feel like the right thing, but like my ego says that I really should do it that way.
Yeah.
Well, your ego and all those stories that are feeding you all those shoulds, those are optimized by all of your stories about what other people think that you should do and everything that you've experienced from the past. And so it feeds you this illusion that if you follow that plan, then there's more certainty and predictability in there. But when you really lean into the truth of it, the truth is that's not giving you any more control. It's just giving you anxiety.
Yeah.
That really we can't predict the future. And so even that story isn't really true, even though it feels safer. But really that's actually been shaped by experiences from the past and other people's perceptions. And guess what? Their perceptions were shaped by their experiences of the past. And the reason you want something is because it's something you don't have right now. And so if you want something you haven't experienced yet, actually that feeling of like, oh, I'm not totally certain that this will totally exactly work out. That sense of not having complete control is actually a good thing because it means you're probably moving towards something new that you haven't experienced before.
Really beautifully said. And I'm reminded of, so if we kind of stay along this theme of this roadmap, right, that
Yeah,
is
please.
my book. So the what you're talking about, the next two steps in the roadmap, right? So I call them choices. These are 5 deliberate choices.
And the first choice, just remind
Feel it
us,
out, don't figure it out.
feel it out, don't figure it out.
Right. And when I say choices, like they're perceptual choices, right? What I was really clear on and in helping people navigate into more meaning and fulfillment is that while we can make changes and make choices at the level of action, it's not going to help. I mean, it'll make some improvement. Really, where the work is it's choice at the level of perception, right? And so that first one is we've been talking about feel it out, don't figure it out. What you're talking about right here kind of is a combination of the two, this idea of trust and hope. And because the second one is choose to know that there is no way things should be. And it's the fallacy of this utopian ideal outside of ourselves that represents the big book of shoulds, that if you follow it, you're going to live the good life. Doesn't exist, right? And we get trapped and we hold ourselves underwater to this unchecked ideal, and we end up miserable. But
And I've never met anyone in my entire life who has said, you know what? I followed the list of things that I should do that I felt the pressure from everyone else about.
Yeah.
And I'm really happy and I'm living exactly the life that I want.
said no one ever,
Yeah.
right?
We've never met that person.
No. It's so funny. I'm reminded of a conversation with my son. He's 16 right now, and he's going through existential crises.
Sure.
And it's funny because, I live and breathe and talk all of this. And so he's like, so if I don't feel like I need to go to college, I'm like, follow it, buddy. I'm like, but seriously, I'm like, I trust you.
Yeah. Well, is that truly what you feel?
I'm like, you know what? Go get data. Like, who am I to say?
Hell yeah.
Right? And so, but he's like, oh, but the shoulds, and I know I should get my GED. I'm like, well, I'm with you on that.
Deepen into the truth of what you feel.
And I'm like, but then it comes back to, where's the relief for you? And he's like, I get no relief at the thought of dropping out of high school. I'm like, good, so follow that.
Okay, great.
And
you're like, thank God.
I'm like, I do want to make sure that, But I love that he's working through this stuff himself, and
Sure.
and he's
Well,
so
and
honest.
arguably there's no skill that a kid or a teenager needs more of today.
Yeah.
In this world where everyone is competing for your attention, to have the skill of even just practicing, feeling out to see like, what is it here within me that I really want?
Yeah.
Just even the skill of exploring that, even if you don't feel like you get really good at that, just to be practicing it. It's the most important skill right now.
I mean, and I think that's what we need to be helping our youth get better at, is really feeling into that and trusting it. And which goes back to what you're talking about, trust, right? Yeah. Trust, because trust is a precursor to hope. And I think hope is one of the most life-giving emotions on the planet, You
really can't. Anyone that I worked with as a therapist, first and foremost, was always about trying to excavate where do they have hope? Yeah. because unless you have hope, you have nothing that really lights your life.
Yeah.
And ultimately, when you're in a dark room that's filled with mud, it's really, really hard to get up and do anything. You need some sort of light to be able to take a look around and walk forward with.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, this sense of confidence, because I call it confidence, because confidence comes from two Latin words, cum fidere, which is to trust and with. And so we build confidence by exploring and expressing our truth. But when you don't have experiences as a kid and as a teenager and early in life, actually exploring what's true for you, of course you're not going to have trust with what you want. And of course it's going to feel scary, and you're going to do it less and less, and you're going to look for ways out of yourself. And you inevitably then are going to look for something to trust. And then the only thing to trust are the book of shoulds.
Mm-hmm.
But
Or
ultimately
things
that's shaped by illusion.
Right. Or things that numb you out. Right. And you
Yeah.
check out, and then you
Yeah.
trust. It's
I
like,
trust this thing because it just makes things quieter.
that's it. Yeah. Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
All right, so that's the second choice.
Yeah. The third one can be shocking for folks at first, but then when they start to see how you can frame it, it's really transformative. But the third one is to decide, to choose to know that it's always working out for you. And this can be on face value, that can be hard for folks,
Sure.
But
Well, can you say why it can be hard for folks?
because it's like, well, how is it that this horrible thing that I did not choose, that I did not will, that I did not want, that was so tragic and how is that working out for me?
Sure, I have a lot of evidence of things that didn't feel like they were working out for me.
Right.
So how could I possibly believe that?
Right. So again, I take a step back and I say, this plane of existence is predicated on duality. If there is joy, there is suffering. If there is suffering, there is joy. If there is pain, there is ease. I mean, it's just how it goes. And we can't escape darkness. And in the same way that we really can't, lightness and darkness are two sides of the same coin. I say this because something I think about a lot is that, we're always growing by virtue of our experiences and we're always growing whether we like it or not. And I mean, we might even not be growing in the direction we desire, but we're growing, right?
Totally.
And so the way I see it, there's two ways that we grow. We either grow on purpose or we grow by accident. And I think because of our conditioning, many of us just want to focus on the stuff that was on purpose. We want to talk about the growth that was in the light, right? The sunlight and the leaves and it's just because I intended it. I wanted this. I planned for it, and it went well, and it went according to plan. And
I can post about this on my Instagram.
Bingo, right. And so we're really good at highlighting the growth on purpose. What we don't want to embrace is the growth by accident. And what's that stuff? That's the stuff that I didn't intend. That was the stuff that went poorly. That was the failures. Those were the mistakes, the tragedies, the traumas. And I don't know of any human on the planet that doesn't have that as a category of life. It's just inevitable.
Totally.
Right?
Well, and when I look at my own life, I cannot separate the things in my life that are my greatest joys and are like the sweetest fruits of my life from my deepest heartbreaks. That ultimately, those things that felt like fractures actually ended up becoming space for roots to deepen into that then actually hold up everything that I call sweet in my life today.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's true for most of us, that if we really take a look at it, that our deepest pains often shine light on or give birth to our deepest values and the things that we care most about.
If we choose to harvest the gold, right? And we choose to harvest the fruit from it, right? Yeah, absolutely. And so, when it comes to the third choice, it's always working out for you. It's a choice to see it this way. And the logic we could apply is this. So you know how you might be in your now moment, right? And you're like what you're referencing. You're in your now moment, and you look back to something in the past that was really painful, right? That provided the roots of which you are now describing.
Sure.
But at this moment in your life, you can look back, and you look at it, and you say, yeah, that sucked, but if it wasn't for this, I wouldn't have this, and I wouldn't, and I wouldn't be here. And so from this point, and in this vantage point, you look back with gratitude. You look back, with this reverence. Maybe you look back with perspective, and you're able to see how that was a necessary piece of this bigger puzzle that makes you who you are today. And as a result, you're grateful on some level. And you see the purposefulness of it. But you couldn't have seen it back then
Sure.
because it was too painful. And so, if that's true for all of our life experiences, and I haven't met anyone that's gone through anything that hasn't looked back and said, it sucked, but, right? We can look back and we can harvest something. Now, if we do that, which we do, we can be in our now moment, and we can be in a pretty awful moment. And so what I've gotten good at is, well, if I'm in a pretty awful moment, then there's a part of me that goes, you know what? First off, nothing is permanent in the world. Everything is always changing, and permanence is a reality. Okay, so nothing's permanent, and there is going to be a point in the future in which I'm going to look back, and 100% I'm going to be grateful for it. So instead of waiting for my future self to tell me how this crap's going to turn out, I'm just going to turn it to manure now. It's not shit, it's manure, right? And I'm just going to look at it as fertilizer, and I'm going to and in this moment, I'm actually going to narrate how this is on purpose for my future self. And so in that way, I'm able to say, you know what, this is not fun, but maybe it is working out for me. Now, is it a truth? I don't know, but it's a choice. And it sure as heck feels a lot better than being in this moment and pushing against it. Because what I am clear about is all negative emotion is simply a measure of resistance to what is. And if I'm resisting this, because I don't want it, I didn't want it, I didn't intend it, I'm afraid of it, I'm ashamed of it, whatever. I'm just causing myself to be below neutral in negative emotion. And I don't want that. Going back to what we were just talking about, what we ultimately want is a feeling. None of us want to feel bad.
So can you say more about all negative emotion
Yeah.
being about resistance?
Sure. So I've thought a lot about this. So just for the sake of argument, okay,
Please.
we're going to make this really like...
It's one of my
we're gonna
favorite
break
things.
We break it down like a math proof. I'm going to make very logical here. So let's imagine that all emotions you could ever feel
Yep.
could be mapped on a vertical scale.
Got it.
Okay, so here's neutral. So here's all the positive emotions increasing in positivity. Here's all the negative emotions increasing in negativity. Right?
Sure.
So now what we've been talking about is everything, feeling it out. We want a feeling. I'm pretty sure most humans, we all kind of want to hang out above the neutral line. That's why we want what we want. It's why we do what we do. We want to be up here. We don't like being down here.
Sure.
And when we find ourselves down here, we do anything we can to get ourselves back up here, right? And so we move the pieces around. We change conditions. We change partners. We change jobs. We do whatever we can to get back up here.
Yep.
But what I'm fairly certain about is that everything below neutral, and it doesn't matter what gradient of negative emotion, it could be as mild as confusion or as intense as revenge. Everything below neutral is simply caused by, if I'm down here I am in my now moment, and as soon as I resist what is, as I push against reality in any way, shape, or form, boom, I drop below neutral. And to the degree that I push is to the degree that I'm negative. And that, and there's no getting around it. And you can look at every single negative emotion. I mean, you can check this out for yourself.
Sure.
Think of anything that's causing you any reason to be down here, and notice that it's purely due to a resistance to the thing. And if you were to stop resisting, you'd float back up the scale.
And what I know to be true about that is, in the research, any emotion, when you actually allow yourself to feel it, when you're not shutting yourself off from the embodied experience of experiencing the energy of whatever that feeling is, they last for about 90 seconds.
90 seconds.
90 seconds for your
Yeah.
body to feel that. And then
That's
the
right.
point is, okay, well, what happens after those 90 seconds? Well, guess where you are? You're back in that neutral place.
Yes.
And so it's really about, rather than also getting attached to trying to feel good all the time,
Yeah.
it's about getting really good at feeling,
That's it.
so that you can allow the things that are unpleasant or negative that come through. It's not about rejecting them and trying to push them away and say, no, I'm not going to feel that. I'm only going to feel the good stuff.
No,
It's
right.
about, can you get so good at feeling that stuff that you don't need to try and shut it away or trap yourself in it, which is
Right.
another way we try to control it, which then just is this resistance. Instead,
Totally.
just allowing yourself to feel it, so that then you can spend more time thinking about and optimizing yourself towards what do I want to be really feeling more of.
Yes. Another way I put it is to be with, right? And so it's the art of just being with it, without resistance, without grasping, without judgment, to just let it be. Because all emotions are weather systems, and they're meant to move. And we stop those systems, because of our narratives and these ideas of what should be, right? And so,
Well, and it protects us from vulnerability.
right.
To
But see,
that
there's that fear.
ultimately it's this experiential avoidance that it feels really vulnerable to just lean into the uncertainty and openness of feeling something uncomfortable. And so we can so often get hooked into trying to story everything and problem solve it and intellectualize it and figure it out.
Right.
But then ultimately what that causes is just more resistance, and it actually keeps us stuck in that place.
Keeps us down here. Yep.
Yeah.
And then and it becomes a whole cycle. Yeah. Totally.
Well, so say the third choice again for us.
So the third choice is it's always working. Choose to know it's always working out for you. So it's interesting because the second one is there is no way things should be, right? And if you decide, okay, well, if there is no way things should be, there's the way I want them, but there's no way they should be, right? Then now I'm going to go forth, but now I'm going to get a whole host of experiences, light and dark.
Yeah.
And this is where we're not just going for light because we can't.
Right.
But there is an art and a practice in being able to embrace and be with both light and dark.
Yes.
And so what choice 3 really is about is let life be life, let things be things. And can we be with these things and harvest the fruit from it proactively so that we don't have to unnecessarily be below the neutral line? And it's not just here where I get excited. It's not just because I want everybody above the neutral line.
Right.
I see this as a bandwidth issue. Because if I'm hanging out down here because of all the narratives I'm telling about what should have happened and what didn't happen and what should be and isn't and who I should be and who you should be, right? I'm doing this. I'm pushing against. This eats up resources.
I'm creating stress.
Totally. And, I'm thinking about, in positive psychology, there's the broaden and build theory, right? Which essentially says we have more creativity, more resources when we're in positive states. So I'm like, yeah, clearly, because when we're in positive states, we're not eating up our own resources. This takes energy.
Well, and you can just feel that.
Yeah.
You walk into a room with a whole bunch of people that are really stressed out, that were just arguing. And then what you're going to do is you're going to look around the room, you're going to see, how do I get out of here? Or where can I stand where I'm not in this? Or you'll even notice your own body start to sort of close up.
Yeah.
Where you can sort of feel it's like this closing of capacity, as opposed to if people are in like bliss or happiness or gratitude or joy, it literally in people's bodies, we're more open. And so that just illustrates to you the capacity that we have when we're in this like contracted, resistive, unpleasant state, as opposed to when we are increasing our capacity. And ultimately, the challenges that we have to solve today are too difficult for us not to be looking at how we can all be expanding our own and each other's capacity.
Bingo. I am so passionate about what you just said. Again, because we really start to help the world heal when we can help people see that they have agency to be in the driver's seat, to give themselves that lift, to give a sense of purpose, to give a sense of meaning, to actually feel better, but more importantly, to give themselves the resources.
Yes.
To respond instead of react,
Yes.
to create new solutions, to take those resources and instead of just fight, actually create solutions, innovative solutions, do more with that energy,
Yes.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen Viktor Frankl's speech where he talks about crabbing?
I have not.
Okay, so you'll love this. And because it keeps popping up in my mind as you're talking about this third choice.
Okay.
And so Viktor Frankl, the founder of existentialism.
Oh, I know.
Anyone that's listening that doesn't know
yes.
him, like he wrote A Man's Search for Meaning.
Yes.
He's this Jewish psychologist that was trapped in a concentration camp. And what he found for himself was that the one choice that the Nazis couldn't take from him was his choice around what he decided to give meaning to. And so he's on this stage in this one clip, and he's talking about crabbing. He just started taking flying lessons. And while taking these flying lessons, what the pilot explained to him was there's point A, B, and C. So for anyone that can't see, like A, I'm pointing up high, B is in the middle, C is below. And as a pilot on this plane, if they were to fly just heading straight towards point B, they would inevitably land at point C because they forgot to account for the turbulence that they could not see. Though if they actually aim above point B, higher than everything that they can perceive, accounting for all that they cannot see, then they actually end up landing at point B. And so it's this point of choosing to believe that it's all working out for you, is choosing to trust variables that you might not see or understand. And that actually gets to be more true to our experience. That ultimately we are limited beings that have limited capacity for understanding the universe within us and around us. And so in order to account for that truth, you actually have to be a bit of an optimist. You actually have to aim a little bit higher than what feels or that is absolutely certain, that a little bit of that uncertainty is necessary. And that if you actually aim a little bit higher at choosing, oh, you know what, everything's always working out for me, that might feel like a bit of a stretch. And that actually, good. That means that's a good thing because you're actually getting closer to truth. You're allowing for the power of the universe that you don't quite understand. Because if you were only aiming towards everything that was absolutely certain, you would actually land below.
Well, I love it. I love it. Now you said crabbing. So
Crabbing.
yeah,
so
I'm like,
so
I'm like,
crabbing.
so where did the crabs come in?
So crabbing is what the pilot said is the practice
Oh,
of
that's
accounting for
crabbing.
that
Okay,
turbulence.
okay. I didn't
That's
catch
what
that.
crabbing
Okay,
is.
okay.
It's like, where
I'm
are
like-
the crabs?
I'm like, hold on, yeah.
Yes, good point. I did not mention that.
That's awesome. That's really beautiful. Yeah, and it's feels like a universal truth. You know.
Certainly one I feel like I consistently come back to.
Yeah.
All right, so those are the first three. What's the fourth choice?
The fourth choice is that you're already whole and complete, right? You're already whole and complete. And this one, again, this can be hard for folks too because
another
they have
vulnerable choice.
They have deep sense of inadequacy or just not enoughness, you know. And my whole thing is, you know, you were born whole and complete. You've been whole and complete. You've just made choices about who you are to withstand the pain of rejection. And so we imprint false negative beliefs to make sense of and navigate forevermore in a way to protect ourselves for future disconnection.
And it happens to basically everybody.
Everyone. No one's immune to this.
And it happens in our childhood.
Yep.
And if you think about it, it makes a ton of sense because what ends up happening as a child, when we're really, really young, we can't really understand the full complexity of why things are happening.
Totally.
So we create shortcuts. And so inevitably what ends up happening is something painful happens. And it's not safe as a kid to blame the adults that are around you.
No, the world would fall apart.
Right.
The whole model of the world would
I don't even
break.
know where my food comes from as a
Yeah.
5-year-old.
Yeah.
So, like, I can't blame them. They feed me.
That's right.
They give me my shelter. So what we do instead is we blame ourselves. And we shame ourselves to give us a sense of control so that it's not so uncertain, this whole pain thing. So we wrap that story there. And, like, we sort of need that as kids, but as we grow up, we have to be able to identify how we have turned that into patterning for how we live our life to give us a sense of control that really is just an illusion, and it's led us into these patterns that disconnect us from ourselves.
So, and now we get back to what we were talking about, like healing the world. It is a relationship with self-game. Because the fallout that we experience is because of this disconnection from self. You know, the way I talk about it is, you know, all of us have that moment where we split our sense of self, where at one moment we're whole and complete unconditionally. You know, and that's why when you're with toddlers, they're so free. They're so free because they don't think of themselves as inadequate or not worthy. And that's why they can wear a pink sock and a blue sock and wear a tiara and have snot in the nose and sing out loud in a restaurant.
And you can't help but
be so
smile as
happy.
you just, like, see their brightness of how they're living.
Because there's a part of you that just remembers that freedom, that remembers that self-expression that comes from an authentic relationship with self, where it's an unconditional knowing of wholeness. And it's pure and it's beautiful. Of course, it's innocent, right? Because the brain isn't fully developed. but it's beautiful. And we are that for a period of time until something happens that where we experience a grave sense of danger. Maybe it's because mom, dropped us off at daycare or whatever it might be. It doesn't even matter what it
Some
is.
pain that's so big
It
it
just-
doesn't make sense.
Right? And it doesn't matter. But in order to make sense of that, the brain says, okay, you know what? Let's figure out why this happened. You must not be good enough.
Yeah.
And so we imprint and we split our sense of self. And so all the while there is this part of us that knows that we're worthy, but then there's this part of us that believes that we're not good enough. And that paradigm of belief that gets layered on top of the truth is what we start to navigate and live from. And we develop survival mechanisms to live from that. And so all of the strengths that we develop as a way to continue to hide this part of us. If I just got to make sure the world doesn't see me as not good enough, because if they see me as not good enough, I'm going to get rejected, I'm going to die. Right? It's what happens is this right here, this causes the fallout, right? Because it's totally rooted in fear. This paradigm of belief it's rooted in scarcity, it's rooted in fear, and it's just not true. And all this turmoil that we're living in the world is because of this. And if we want to heal the world, we have to first come back home to ourselves. And what does that mean? It means to come back home to this unconditional knowing of wholeness and completeness. And what's so radical about this, Matt, is that to choose to know that you're whole and complete is the easiest thing you'll ever do. Because you just choose to know it. You can't use proof, because that's the thing about knowing. Believing requires proof. So the moment you need to prove, the moment you put your sense of self in the paradigm of belief, you're hosed. Because you'll never find enough proof to come back home. You'll never find enough proof because there's always counterproof. Remember? Duality. Always. So you'll never, and that's why people keep chasing and chasing and chasing. And so there's so much to say about this.
Well, and what's beautiful is from the very first choice, you start reinforcing that fourth choice.
Yeah.
Because it's a radical thing to put down the tool of figuring it out, to actually show yourself through your action that you are complete and worthy enough to actually give yourself permission to just feel what you're experiencing.
Yes.
And then you witness yourself doing that.
Yes.
That ultimately, if you are putting down the problem solving and the planning and the to-do listing, to just allow yourself to be present with whatever you're experiencing, you're showing yourself that you're worthy. You're reinforcing that belief that maybe I'm not carrying a brokenness that I need to account for with my to-do list going forward.
Mm-hmm.
You deepen that trust in that story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then that trust gets to be this stability underneath you that empowers the continued vulnerability to continue to lean into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 I mean, in this part of the conversation, when discussing all things, I don't know what we call it, meaning, purpose, fulfillment, joy, thriving, right? It's so rich, and it's so, just to think, you're already worthy. You're already whole. You're already enough. Yeah. That's something you can't prove. And the moment you go try to prove it, you're going to feel incomplete.
Well, and then there's a question that comes with it.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, I've settled into the truth that I am already worthy and complete and I'm not broken.
Yep.
But then what do I do? If there's not a brokenness that I need to account for in my to-do listing, what do I do now?
Well, it's interesting in the space. So what happens is if we can really align with the truth that I know, and so that's the fifth one, because to make it fully complete here is to know, don't believe your worth. You have to know it.
To know your worth.
You can't believe it. And the distinction, again, it goes back to this idea that knowing is a choice that is despite conditions. You're not using proof to validate this. It's you're just choosing to know it. Believing requires proof, right? Now, for many of us, we've been conditioned to prove ourselves safe because of this false belief we've taken on, that we're not worthy or we're not good enough or we're not, fill in the blank. So we've conditioned ourselves to be in this proving paradigm. So much of how we navigate the world is I've got to prove I've got to prove myself safe. I've got to prove my worth. I've got to prove to get the acceptance, to get the accolades, to feel successful, to feel enough. And we get so used to proving that all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, if I'm not proving, well, then what am I doing? I'm like, that's living. And that's where then you start to ask, well, what do I really want to feel? And then now, all of a sudden, the spotlight turns to service. Because if it's not about myself, it's not about self anymore. It's about service. Because if I don't have to prove, which I don't, then what's left? Oh my gosh, to live this incredible life and to serve and to be a positive impact to life on Earth, like just to contribute to harmonic resonance on the planet.
Yeah, what I love about that is what's coming to mind for me is when I've been hooked in with patterns that grew out of this story that I'm not worthy, that I'm broken, that I need to follow the shoulds. What ends up happening is I am fighting for a table that I am allowed to exist on, so that then I could allow myself to have a light. But if instead you choose to know that you are worthy, that you already have a table to stand on, and that you have a light, now all that's left is to grow it and to share it. And that then it brings to mind that metaphor of a candle.
Yeah.
A candle's light doesn't dwindle by sharing it with others.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And honestly, I think knowing the choice to know, again, it's radical because for many of us, we've been conditioned to prove that it's such a weird perceptual muscle to choose to know something without validating it, especially when it comes to our sense of self and worth. But when you start to do that, it's like, whoa, it's the easiest thing we'll do. And here it is, it's freedom. Because the moment you choose to know your wholeness, right? And I'm not saying choose to know that you're perfect, choose to know that you're amazing, right? That's all stuff in the paradigm of belief. That's all proving stuff. But innate wholeness and completeness, resiliency, resourcefulness, enoughness, that's innate, right? When you choose to know that, essentially you take the glasses of belief off. Now, with those off, stuff around you isn't threatening anymore because nothing looks like evidence for or against your worth. So that statement that person made has nothing to do with you, and you see it with compassion. That mistake you made isn't threatening. It's just information that I should try it different next time, right? This failure that happened, oh, you know what? It's giving me it's an amazing experience that's going to deepen my values and my wisdom. It's freedom, right? To know who you are, to choose to know that at the core is ultimate freedom. And by no means is this like, Pollyanna sky in the eye. This is wisdom. It's objective wisdom because we're not saying, oh, I'm perfect and I'm amazing. No, it's just you're giving yourself that very base truth of I'm whole, and now from this point forward, I'm going to go live. And you know what? There's going to be light and there's going to be dark. And I'm going to do things well, and I'm going to make mistakes. And I'm going to shine, and I'm going to step on toes.
And none of it has to be evidence saying anything about my worth.
Bingo. Bingo. It's just information of how I'm doing on the path in the direction of the service I want to provide. That's it. That is what I think when it comes down to like this to me is how I like to think of meaning and purpose, right?
Yeah,
it's a way of being. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
It's and to me, freedom, I stand for that. I stand for that. And I know that that's our birthright. And so going back to, it's the fear of false perception, right? And this false perception that many of us hold is what's keeping us in turmoil with ourselves, with each other, and creating a lot of the turmoil on the planet. So breaking free from this false perception, this proving paradigm and all of this, I think we start to heal humanity here.
Amen. Yeah, so Matthew and I, we've had a lot of conversations about why we're doing the work that we're doing. And one of the things that we always come back to is that ultimately there's a certain feeling of going to like a music festival where you can walk around and you can see so many other people expressing and expanding themselves. And when you're in the presence of that, it also like brightens you and like expresses and expands yourself.
Yeah.
And so like the work that we do around empowering managers and leaders and transforming workplace systems, that sure, that's about increasing particular skills and trying to bring people more belonging and purpose, and to enhance our stress regulation capacities, and ultimately to help people create more value or be more productive. But really at its baseline, it's selfish. Like, I want to live in a world where people are being their fullest and truest selves, because it creates more fun for me to be more of my fullest and truest self.
That's so beautiful. It's and I love this. This is how I got to know y'all. This is so fun because our works intersects in this way, and I just adore Matthew. He's
Me
just the
too.
greatest.
Me
Oh
too.
my goodness, what a soul brother. Both of you are. But it's the ripple effect, though. These managers, these leaders, influence, and they touch so many other people's lives, and to be able to create that positive ripple effect, I think, is so tremendous.
Yeah. Yeah. Could you say more about how you think about leadership and the state of leadership today, and like the responsibility of a leader?
Oh gosh,
Yeah, well, and really I'm thinking about, we're coming out of this conversation talking about the individual so far, and that ultimately the 5 deliberate choices that an individual can make
Sure.
to create more power in their life and how they live, to unlock more fulfillment, joy, purpose. And then there's another question that comes when you're a leader, someone who has responsibility and power with and over others.
Yeah.
And then there's a question of, well, how do I relate towards them, and why should that matter? And so the first question there that really comes to mind is, why should a leader care about how much purpose or fulfillment or joy anyone that works with or for them has?
What's interesting, Matt, is with all the leaders I work with, and the purpose conversation is it's a small percentage that I'm working with, because nobody's coming to me wondering about this.
Right. What are they coming to you wondering?
They're coming to me because they can't meet their business objectives, because they get innately that something in how they're all relating to one another is broken.
Something's not clicking.
And they get innately that it has to do with the ways in which they're relating, the leadership team, and it just, because here's the deal, like, none of us live in a vacuum.
Right.
Nothing is created in a vacuum.
Right.
Everything is happening via this medium of communication. And so, for the leaders that zoom out enough to realize, okay, it's actually, we're not getting anywhere because it's actually not the prioritization. It's not the decisions we've made. It's not making better decisions. Something's not working here. And how do I know? Because we're conflict averse, because, there's back channeling, because we can tell people are withholding information and doing. It's these symptoms of fallout. And at the end of the day, it's the symptoms of low trust.
Yep.
But the interesting thing, and what drives leaders nuts, is they get that nobody on the team is distrustful, right?
Sure.
And so they're like, wait, but it's not trust. I'm like, but it is trust, because look at these dynamics. And so,
And that's a big shift for folks.
Yeah.
Because we don't, very few of us walk around thinking that we work entirely with these evil, distrustful people.
Nobody
that
thinks
don't
that, yeah.
don't trust each other. Like, we wouldn't work with each other if we
Right.
didn't think that we were like good at some things, or like
Right.
didn't like some of the people here. But that's not quite what it is. Trust is an equation that is built and broken with behaviors.
Right.
And
And I actually take it down to conversation, because
more
everything's
about that.
happening. Because everything's happening in conversation. So, something I'm really passionate about, and it's been a majority of my time coaching and consulting and speaking on, is conversational intelligence, right? And so it's the neuroscience of trust, and it's the neuroscience of communication. And so what I help people see is that is we demystify this thing called trust, right? As trust is, we all have an innate understanding of what it is, and it's right. Whatever we think it is, it's right.
Sure.
And it is a neurological state in which we're optimized for our greatest thinking.
Totally.
But that state just doesn't happen It's created and eroded in real time via our interaction dynamics.
Yeah, it's our shared story of what is our experience together, and it's written by what has happened before
And well,
up
and
to
I'd
this
say,
moment.
and it's the interaction dynamics and the ways in which we're speaking and listening, because in every moment, our brains are serving up these neurochemical cocktails that are either opening or closing our brain based upon how it's perceiving safety, right? And do I feel I can move in this direction because you're safe to me, or is it not? And so when I can help people see trust isn't this real mysterious thing. It's actually not an emotion. It's not a soft thing. It's not. Let's just take it down to hard science and let's map this to the ways in which you communicate so that we can increase the trust in the culture so that all these symptoms don't. We got to solve all these symptoms, right?
Sure.
And so, to your question about like what are we seeing in leadership, it's. I mean, I think it's all over the board in terms of what what I'm seeing, but there's a tremendous need to help leaders be as conversationally intelligent as possible to ensure that the impact that they're having on those that they touch matches the intention they hold. Because what tends to happen, and I don't know, maybe you might agree, is that you take someone who starts climbing that ladder,
Yep.
right? And so they start going up the ladder, and what they tend to believe is, oh, it's because my intention is so strong, because like the way I'm thinking about it, my approach and my intention and my approach. And so the focus as the leader starts to go up the ladder and influence and scope and power is, oh, it's because of my thinking, it's because of my strategy, it's because of my intention. And what often tends to happen is they start to lose sight of the impact they're having on people.
Sure.
Are they closing down as a result of the style? Are they closing down as a result of, or pulling back or protecting or withholding as a result of how it's landing, right? And and so the lack of that awareness continues to create a lack of safety. And so, I think one of the most important things that we can be doing right now is helping heighten that awareness of the impact and ensuring there's congruency. Right. And it's just, and when people know that a leader is aware of how they're landing and does the work, and it's not much, just to make sure that it's congruent. I mean, that is probably one of the most powerful signals of safety for
Well,
any.
I see
any
such
individual.
drastic changes on teams, and a part of it is hard because there's some truth with that story as you're climbing the ladder that, well, I'm being promoted because I'm so skillful in how I accomplish things and how talented I am at strategically thinking. And there's some truth in that. And although you might be really talented at figuring out the right what's, how you do those matter.
Yeah.
And that ultimately it can feel like this like ambiguous bucket, I find, with leaders when you start talking about the how or the conversational intelligence and the skills that are involved there. If you haven't really spent much time sharpening those skills, it can feel kind of scary and ambiguous. It's like, well, I don't have time to like change how I'm talking to people about some of these things. Like, I need to get so much serious stuff done. Like, I'm just going to spend all my time talking about people's feelings with them.
Oh my gosh, and that sometimes that might be the initial reaction, but when it doesn't take
changes
long,
very fast.
so fast when you see what the real cost is.
Right. And when you get to just try sharpening some particular skill or practicing some particular skill, and then you see it in motion.
And then you're like, oh.
Oh, it can be that simple?
Yeah. I was just debriefing with a leader yesterday. He's been working hard to increase his conversational intelligence, and he's been so dedicated to this. And I mean, it's really commendable how much he's really committed to closing that loop between intention and impact. Because no leader wakes up in the morning saying, "Oh, I really want to screw it, screw so and so." And
there might be some, but the point is, it's like a fraction of 1%.
Tiny. Oh my gosh, right, so tiny.
The vast majority of
Totally.
leaders want to accomplish things that matter, and they want people
want
to
to do
generally have a good experience, and they want to have a good impact.
Right,
on
and they
people.
want to do good. Yeah. So this particular leader, it was so delightful because, while, all of the things on the, I want to make sure that all my stakeholders trust me, that they listen. I mean, all the things that you want on like all of that has happened. But the coolest byproduct of doing this work, he shared yesterday, he said, all of a sudden, he goes, all of these other people, like in cross-functional teams, like lower levels down, are now informally texting me to innovate and to collaborate. And that's never happened before. And then, VPs from this other here, and they're now collaborating informally. And as a result, the innovation has shot through the roof. And that was just such a lovely byproduct. And what he's seeing is because I'm safer. Because people get that I'm not going to make them wrong for an idea. They get that I'm not going to just be transactional in this moment. It's not about getting it done. It's about co-creating something here. And as a result, like the quality and the frequency of meaningful, creative conversations has increased. And when you think about like what's the ROI of doing this work, that's pretty cool. Because that leads to so much, right?
I mean, that's effective collaboration and creativity,
Yep.
which like every team wants more of.
Yeah, it's so great, and that's why I love what you guys are doing. Because I think about, so I'm working with, and I was telling Matthew this. So I'm working with these founders, these executives, and I'm limited in how much I can actually impact because all I'm working off is their reported experiences.
Sure.
Other stakeholders that I get to talk to get their feedback, maybe a 360, right? If I'm lucky, maybe they'll send a recording of them in a meeting or something, but that's weird. It's super rare that I'm able to sit in unless I go into on site to shadow. But it's the
Sure.
observer effect,
Sure.
It's like as soon as the observer's there,
This
it
isn't
changes
what
the
happens
system.
when I'm not in the room.
Right, exactly, right? Yeah, and so that's all I can go off of to help truly elevate the conversational intelligence in a leadership team or in a company. And so it's there's only so much I can do. Yeah. And this is where you guys come in, and now you've got this solution to be able to be providing that real-time information that I don't have access to, but if I did, as their coach, as their consultant, oh my gosh, we could completely, totally accelerate the rate of change.
Well, and our business and our product was born out of that same like frustration and hunger of working with leaders and working with teams and then feeling like, well, at best we can send people surveys or just have them tell us about what's changing. But it's hard to be able to get this sort of visibility that like a personal trainer gets, where they can have objective data about how somebody is progressing in a particular skill. And so it's like the magic of this hybrid model where there is so much data that's already created in how we are getting work done and how we're communicating, that now there's this opportunity with AI to let us utilize that data to create more objective metrics so you can have better collaboration with people supporting you in how you learn and develop your skills. Yeah. And it's like the analogy I always use is modern workplace development and coaching sort of operates like if we were to train doctors by having them go into an operating room and then come out in the middle of a surgery or after surgery and then get on a Zoom call with an amazing doctor educator and then say, all right, here's what I think I saw in there. And the chances that that doctor is going to get better, let alone save that person's life on that operating table, really small. But all of a sudden, if there's another doctor in the room with them, or if there's a camera on that person's head and an earpiece in their ear, where live they can be getting the sort of coaching that like every elite sports team has access to, now you can get within the flow of work like personalized development that can actually change the game.
Yeah. I mean, it's so good. You're onto something when, here it is, relief.
Yeah.
The moment I met Matthew and I'm like, oh my gosh, that sense of like, it's so obvious. It's so obvious.
I mean, we talk about it all the time. It's a real gift that, we work our asses off like any entrepreneur does, and we work long days, long weeks, but it's that feeling, right? That we know this is the path that we're supposed to be walking on. We know this is the work that we're supposed to be doing. And so it's that sense of expansion and abundance in everything that we're doing.
Yeah. No, it's I mean, the way that's why my heart is with you both. The way I see it, it's just it's facilitating harmonic resonance and global consciousness,
Yeah, we're
Whatever we
we're
can
just injecting a little bit more feedback and reflection in how we're showing up to empower all of us to access and deploy more of our wisdom.
Yeah.
And how we relate.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, we're talking about this, which is, our product, which is really focused on personalized upskilling and adaptive learning. If we were to really think about the future of work and what you'd love to see transform in workplaces, particularly around how we shape and develop leadership skills and the ways that we communicate, what would you love to see change and transform?
Well, I'm so fired up about what's possible with what you guys are doing. But I would, in the same way that Zooms have become ubiquitous, or or Teams, or
Yep.
you name it, video conferences have truly become ubiquitous and almost synonymous with meetings.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, isn't that
It's
funny?
weird, isn't it?
6 years ago, you say meeting and people picture like a room with a
Totally.
table. Now you say
See,
meeting and everyone pictures
sees a
Zoom
Zoom.
call.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's fascinating to me, just how that's. I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense. That's just the world we're in. Exponential changes and exponential growth. Okay.
Sure.
So in the same way that video conferencing has become synonymous with meeting, I would want what you guys are doing as synonymous with leadership. Like, you cannot be a leader, and you cannot and to truly do this and to do right by your job is to get that real-time feedback
Yeah.
on the things that matter. Now, in my world, that's all things communication. Why?
Sure.
Because everything's happening in communication. Right? Now, of course, there's other things like values and all of that. And sure, I'm focused on that in certain areas, but where I see the low-hanging fruit is truly optimizing the ways in which we communicate to create a connected, efficient, and effective humanity, because it's happening in communication. And if we can make what you guys do as synonymous as Zoom is to meeting, then I think we really start to move the needle on,
Yeah, I mean, we think of it as an essential component of leading, that you have consistent feedback that is personalized to you, helping you to develop your skills. Like, you're not allowed to be a football player unless you also have a football coach.
right. And you know what I love about, because you know what's so great? It's because of the feedback. When you say the word feedback to anybody, they do this. Right.
Well, and that's because I spent some time going on some NFL fields and seeing how they do practices. And it's amazing. You've got some people up in the booth looking down below that are on the radio with certain players and certain coaches. And you see coaches running all over the place saying, hey, good job doing that specific thing.
Yeah.
And hey, I know you can get lower than that.
Yeah.
But giving hyper-precise, timely feedback in the moment, and it's just natural. It's just how the organism of practice functions, that it's not hoarded and like put on a shelf that then I'm going to deliver to you once a year with all this collection of stuff that now we sort of have to densely move through and neither of us really know how to talk about.
Yes. And so it makes so much sense for optimal growth. And interestingly, like, many of us have such a wonky relationship to this word called feedback, and I'm pretty sure it's because we really don't know how to do it well. And you know who I think does a
Sure.
great job of teaching this is Carol Robin, who, right, and all that came out of the touchy-feely Stanford GSB curriculum.
Yeah.
And, and then, of course, you look at things like nonviolent communication and the distinctions between emotions and pseudo-emotions. Anyway.
Sure,
I mean,
or
we
like
could have a
imago
whole-
therapy with like relationship counseling.
Right. And we could have a whole like other conversation of that. But what's interesting is that I think everyone gets ready like to guard themselves when they're about to get feedback.
Oh, we're getting
from
some
a
sharp stuff
colleague.
out? Okay, let me get my shields.
Right. And so when it comes to the human aspect of delivering feedback, unless you're someone's coach, right, like my
Yep.
role, or you're hyper skilled in this and you have created such a world of that reputation around you that people feel safe with you. That's rare, right? When people are going to get feedback from their colleague, from their HR partner, from their, they get guarded. What you guys are doing, it's personal, impersonal, right? It's not coming from a human. It's coming from just objective analysis of the inputs and the outputs based upon what's the intention, is the impact congruent. And it makes it, for those of us stuck in the proving paradigm, it makes it less seem like proof about our inherent worth and enoughness, right? And so it's just, I think
It
it's
gets
just,
to be like closing the step counter on your Apple Watch.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, this is just objectively how many steps I've taken, and I
right. I
want
don't
to be
feel
taking this
judged by
many
my,
steps.
I don't feel judged by my Apple Watch.
Right. It's not staring at me and saying, you worthless piece of shit, why aren't you taking more steps? Which is sometimes what it can feel like if a friend were to turn to you and being like, you were really working out more yesterday.
Yeah, that's right. And so I think, what this empowers and enables and what's possible is really freaking cool. And I think just so necessary. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and the skills that technology like ours gets to sharpen are the very skills that help us all to repattern, to be able to embody those 5 deliberate choices more.
Yeah, totally. And and so that's how it all kind of comes together, because while, yes, I wrote that book, and the core of my the coaching and the work that I do kind of comes from that body of work.
Sure.
Communication, that layer is symptomatic of all that stuff, right?
It's the systems that get grown out from the
Yes.
patterns we carry.
Right. And so going back to one of the questions you asked, leaders, so leaders aren't asking me, it's very rare that, they want more fulfillment or purpose. They get it would be a byproduct of probably working together.
Sure.
The immediate need is, help me solve this very abstract problem having to do with teamwork, because we're not meeting our goals.
Sure.
Because growth is stalled, innovation is stalled, right? And so this is the entry point. So the layer of communication that this is an entry point for the deeper work. But we start working on this, and naturally you'll start to see, oh, this is a symptom. How I'm showing up in communication is a symptom of the relationship I have with myself, right? And so it's a very comprehensive kind of thing, but they work together.
Totally. And the magic of developing those skills and creating support and infusing technology that develop those skills for everyone that you work with is that those challenges don't turn into these big ambiguous problems with teamwork that sort of just grow and snowball. Instead, they'll still come up, but they'll be smaller and you'll solve them faster.
Yes.
And so the magic is, whatever your business is, however you're creating value, whatever your business and your team does, you get to do more of that better.
Bingo. I mean, because look, conflict is always going to be there. That's
Sure.
just, and there's nothing wrong with that. We need
Sure.
that. That's how we learn. We're always going to make mistakes, right? But it doesn't have to be so hard. There doesn't have to be so much resistance in it. Yeah. And we can have the tools to ebb and flow and adapt and grow from these hiccups a lot faster. Mm-hmm.
When you slow down and picture the future of how we work in the world, I'm curious what that looks like to you.
That's a big question mark for me.
Yeah.
And you know what it is? I think because the rate of just of how technology is advancing, AI, there's so much. I mean, and I'm just going to speak for me. There's so much I don't know. I don't even know that I know. There is just so many. I know it's hard to even vision what might be possible. I'm trying to just keep up with what was created yesterday as a new tool to help me do that. Whoa, that was cool.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's hard. Yeah, what do you see?
When I really slow down and hold that question, what comes to mind are 2 different paths. And there's one path that is defined by greater concentration of power and wealth, and continued rise of misinformation and disinformation, fraud and cybersecurity attack, and increases in mental health challenge, loneliness, addiction, suicide, overdose, and that side gets really dark, and it turns into like this sort of further polarized, increasingly sort of feudal, autocratic world that like deepens my heartbreak. And then there's this other vision that is defined by a greater distribution of power, where we get to connect and deploy more of the knowledge and wisdom that we've accrued through the many last centuries. And rather than that knowledge living in ivory towers, it's deployed into the highways of our day-to-day life. And each person gets to feel like every day they're becoming more and more of themselves.
Yeah.
And it's this sort of wild world of the way we relate with technology is incredibly creative and astounding, and yet we're more human than we've ever been in the ways that we show up with one another.
Yeah.
And that gives me a tremendous amount of hope. And that's the one I choose to believe we're heading towards, because that's the one I'm going to work toward.
Yeah, I love that you say that. And it reminds me of something I completely synchronistically of my friend. He sent me a podcast he was on about. I was talking to you about him earlier, Tim Chang.
Yeah.
And he had said in his podcast that, you know, maybe because of the proliferation of AI and all of this fake and all of this and this disconnection, we're not going to be able to trust the technology at all. And so we're going to go back to this. I'm sitting right here across from you, Matt, in this conversation. We're not on a Zoom call, right? But our hearts, our humanity is going to crave this. I think we need to come back to our roots, because we've just gotten so far off this thing called truth that we can't trust what we're seeing. Yeah. And so we just need this experience of person in person. So maybe if I slow down and you ask me that question, what do you see in the future of work, inspired by what he had said and what you just said, maybe the future of work is just getting back to our roots and communing in person, slowing it down, not using tools to do this work, right? Now, is that plot? I mean, I don't know. I think some of these tools are really cool.
Totally.
But it's an interesting thought, you know? It's an
Yeah.
interesting thought.
And it's a weird time of transition and creativity where we are exploring where, what, and how to use these tools.
Yeah.
And time will tell.
Yeah. And we just got to keep experimenting, you know?
That's
Get
right.
that data and keep moving it forward.
That's right. And to know that we're worthy.
Unconditionally.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right. If folks have been listening and they're like, holy shit, I need to learn more about Amy, where can they find more about you?
They can find me on my website, which is alwaysonpurpose.com. LinkedIn, that's where I hang out.
Awesome.
Yeah, the only place that is worthy of my attention. And my family and all the other things. But
It
yeah,
can only
that's
go
it.
so many places.
And I'm very, very clear about that.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for sitting down with me today. This was so fun.
So fun. It was so fun. And I'm just so stoked to be a part of your story and be a part of what you're building. And yeah, you've got a fan in me. That's for sure.
Thank you. Back at you.
Thank you, friend.
All right. Bye, everybody. Ta-da! That was so fun.
So fun.
Thank you.
Thank you. You asked great questions. This was like let's keep going.
I know. What else can we explore?
I know. This is great. I'm so excited for what you guys are up to. Yeah.
Seriously, we appreciate it, and I know Matthew is very just excited and lit up every time he interacts with you, and I'm in this interaction also feeling, brighter and deeper in a deep gratitude for you. So just thank you for, being in the creative mess of it with us.
Yeah. Well, I do see it as a huge piece in helping heal humanity. This is helping people wake up and be more aware.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.